The late afternoon sun burned through the dusty windows of Grace Nelson's dress shop in Ouray, Colorado, casting long shadows across the half-finished gown draped over her work table, and she pressed her trembling fingers against the eviction notice that would end everything she had worked for these past 5 years. The words blurred as tears threatened to fall, but she blinked them back with the same stubborn determination that had brought her west from Boston in 1878, a 20-year-old girl with nothing but a sewing kit and dreams of independence. Now, at 25, those dreams were crumbling like the aging brick of the building her landlord refused to repair but still demanded payment for, payment she could no longer make after the winter had been so harsh that half the town's wives had postponed ordering new dresses. She heard the bell above the door chime and quickly folded the notice, tucking it beneath a stack of fabric samples as she turned with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The man who entered had to duck slightly under the doorframe, his broad shoulders filling the space as he removed his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, damp with sweat from the June heat. His clothes marked him as a working man, denim and leather worn but well-maintained, and his boots carried the distinctive marks of someone who spent more time in stirrups than on wooden floors. "Good afternoon," Grace said, smoothing her hands over her simple cotton dress, suddenly conscious of the thread caught in her sleeve and the smudge of chalk on her fingers. "Are you looking for something for your wife?" The stranger's eyes, a startling gray-blue like mountain lakes in winter, swept across the shop with an assessing gaze that seemed to catalog every detail before settling on her face. "Not married," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of someone who had spent time in Texas or perhaps further south. "Name is Zachary Brennan. I am looking for Grace Nelson, though." Her spine straightened automatically, defensive instincts rising. Creditors had started sending men to collect, and while most had been civil, there was always the fear that someone would decide a woman alone was an easy target. "I am Grace Nelson. What can I do for you, Mr. Brennan?" "I heard you might be having some difficulties with your landlord," Zachary said, turning his hat in his hands, and she noticed his fingers were long and capable, scarred in places but clean. "Edmund Harris, right? He owns this building and about half the other properties on this street." Grace felt her cheeks flush hot. "I do not see how my business arrangements are any concern of yours, sir. If Edmund sent you to intimidate me, you can tell him I will have his money by the end of the month." It was a lie, and they both probably knew it, but she lifted her chin and held his gaze. To her surprise, Zachary's expression softened, something almost like admiration flickering in those winter lake eyes. "Harris did not send me. Actually, I came because I have a proposition that might interest you. Could we sit and talk for a few minutes?" "I promise I am not here to cause you trouble." She hesitated, weighing the risk against her curiosity. There was something about this man that did not set off the usual warnings that rang in her head when strange men approached. Perhaps it was the way he stood, respectful of her space, not crowding toward her counter. Or maybe it was the earnestness in his voice, rough but honest. "Very well. I can spare a few minutes, but I have a dress to finish by tomorrow evening." Zachary gestured to a small sitting area she had arranged near the front windows where ladies could wait, while she took measurements or discussed designs. He waited until she had settled into one of the upholstered chairs before taking the other, positioning himself at an angle rather than directly across from her, as though he understood the vulnerability she felt. "I have been working cattle drives for the better part of 10 years, he began, setting his hat on his knee. "Started when I was 15, lying about my age to get hired on. Spent every season moving herds from Texas to Kansas, Kansas to Wyoming, sleeping under stars and eating dust. That sounds like a hard life, Grace said carefully, uncertain where this story was leading. It was, he agreed, but it paid, especially for a man who did not spend his wages on whiskey and cards. I saved nearly everything I made, thinking someday I would want to settle down, maybe buy some land. Last month, I decided that someday had come. I am 25 now and I am tired of drifting. I want roots. Grace found herself leaning forward slightly despite her caution. And you chose our Ray. I've been through here a few times over the years, Zachary said, his gaze drifting to the window where the San Juan Mountains rose in magnificent peaks against the endless Colorado sky. Always struck me as a good town. Mining brings money, but there is also ranching, farming, trade. It is not just going to dry up and blow away like some of these boom towns. It feels like a place where a man could build something lasting. It is a good town, she agreed quietly, thinking of the community that had welcomed her when she had arrived, the women who had commissioned dresses and spread word of her skill, the shopkeepers who had extended credit during lean times. But I still do not understand what this has to do with me, Mr. Brennan. He met her eyes directly, and she saw determination there, but also something gentler that made her heart skip in a way she had not felt in years. I bought this building this morning. Bought it outright from Edmund Harris with the money I have been saving all these years, and I want to make you the owner. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. What? That is impossible. Why would you do such a thing? Because I believe in working people, Zachary said simply. Because I have seen how men like Harris make their money, bleeding hard-working folks dry while the properties crumble around them. Because I asked around town before I made my decision, and everyone told me the same thing. Grace Nelson is honest, talented, and deserves better than to lose everything because one bad winter put her behind on rent. Grace stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor, emotions warring inside her chest, relief and disbelief and suspicion all tangled together. Mr. Brennan, I do not know what you think you know about me, but I cannot accept charity. I have built my business on my own skill and work, and I will not be any man's obligation or project. Zachary rose as well, but he held up one hand in a peaceful gesture. It is not charity, Miss Nelson. I told you I want roots in this town. Part of that means investing in the community, in the people who make it work. I bought the building as an investment. I am offering you ownership because you have already proven you can run a successful business here. All I ask in return is that you let me rent the space above the shop. There are rooms up there, right? I need somewhere to live while I figure out my next steps. She stared at him, searching his face for deception, for the hidden angle that would reveal his true motives. Men did not simply hand over buildings to women they had never met. There had to be something more, some expectation that he was not voicing. And if I say no, then I will still own the building and you will pay rent to me instead of Harris, Zachary said with a slight shrug. But I will keep the rent fair and I will make the repairs that need doing. The roof leaks in the back corner, does it not? And the front step is coming loose. Despite herself, Grace felt a laugh bubble up, though it came out sounding more like a sob. You did do your research. I believe in knowing what I am buying, he said, and there was a hint of warmth in his voice now, almost teasing. So what do you say, Miss Nelson? Will you at least consider my offer? I am not asking you to decide this minute. Think on it, talk to your banker if you want. I can come back tomorrow for your answer. Grace sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. I do not have a banker. I keep my money in a box under my bed at the boarding house like a fool. Then talk to whoever you trust, Zachary said gently, settling back into his own chair. A friend, a pastor, Anyone who can help you think it through. I know it sounds too good to be true, and I understand why you would be suspicious. If our positions were reversed, I would be too." She looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, trying to see past her own fear and desperation to the man underneath. His face was tanned from years in the sun, lines beginning to form at the corners of his eyes from squinting across long distances. There was a small scar on his chin, barely visible beneath the stubble of a few days without shaving. He looked tired, she realized, but it was the satisfied tiredness of someone who had finally reached the end of a long journey rather than the exhaustion of defeat. "Why did you really come west, Mr. Brennan?" she asked suddenly. 10 years ago, when you were just a boy lying about his age, what were you running from?" Something flickered in his expression, a shadow of old pain quickly controlled. "My father was a drunk who thought his fists were the best way to solve any problem. My mother died of fever when I was 12. I had 2 younger sisters I tried to protect, but I was just a kid myself. When my father sold one of them to a man twice her age to pay his debts, I took the other and we ran. Got her safely to our aunt in St. Louis, then I headed west because there was nothing left for me back there but trouble." The raw honesty in his voice cut through Grace's defenses more effectively than any pretty words could have. She recognized the tone, the matter-of-fact delivery of terrible truths from someone who had learned not to expect pity. "Your sister?" she asked softly. "She is married now, has 3 children and a good husband who treats her right," Zachary said, and genuine happiness lit his features. "Writes to me every few months. That is another reason I want to settle down. I want her to be able to write to me at an address that will not change. Want to be able to invite her family to visit somewhere that feels like a real home." Grace felt something shift inside her, the hard protective shell she had built around herself after 5 years of fighting to survive on her own cracking just slightly. "I came west to escape an arranged marriage," she heard herself say, words she had never spoken aloud to anyone in our array. "My parents had decided I would marry a merchant twice my age, a friend of my father's. When I refused, they tried to force me. So I took my mother's jewelry, sold it for traveling money, and came west to make my own life. Do they know where you are?" Zachary asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, only concern. "I wrote them once I had established myself, told them I was safe and happy and they should not try to find me," Grace said. "My mother wrote back once, told me I had broken my father's heart and shamed the family. I never responded and she never wrote again." "That must have been hard," he said quietly, "walking away from family even when they are wrong." "It was," she agreed, "but I have never regretted it. I would rather struggle here on my own terms than live comfortably as someone's property." She looked up at him sharply. "That is why I need to understand what you really want, Mr. Brennan. In my experience, men do not give without expecting something in return." Zachary was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I will not lie and say I do not want anything, Miss Nelson. But what I want is not what you are probably fearing. I want to be part of a community, to know my neighbors and have them know me as someone trustworthy. I want to build a reputation as a fair man who keeps his word. And I suppose, if I am being completely honest, I want to do something good because I have seen so much that was bad. Does that make sense?" It made more sense than Grace wanted to admit. She had felt the same pull herself, the desire to prove that kindness and fairness were not just naive fantasies but ways of actually living in the world. "I will need to see the paperwork," she said finally. "The deed to the building, your offer in writing. And I want it looked at by someone who understands legal matters better than I do." "Of course," Zachary agreed immediately. "The town clerk can verify the deed is legitimate, and I will write up the ownership transfer myself tonight, have it ready for you to review tomorrow. Like I said, take your time deciding. I am not going anywhere." Grace nodded slowly, her mind racing with possibilities and fears and a tiny, fragile hope she was afraid to acknowledge. "All right, come back tomorrow afternoon. I should have the Hendersons' daughter's dress finished by then, and I will have had time to think." Zachary stood, placing his hat back on his head with a slight nod of respect. "Thank you for hearing me out, Miss Nelson. I know this is strange, and I know you have good reason to be cautious. I hope I can prove myself worthy of your trust." He moved toward the door, his steps careful to avoid the samples of fabric she had spread across one table to show clients the new stock that had arrived last week from Denver. Grace watched him go, her thoughts a chaotic swirl, but as his hand touched the door handle, she found herself calling out, "Mr. Brennan." He turned back, eyebrows raised in question. "The room's upstairs," she said hesitantly. "They have been empty since I moved in. My landlord, Harris, he never bothered to rent them out. They are probably dusty, maybe in need of cleaning." "I am not afraid of dust," Zachary said with a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer, almost boyish. "Spent most of my life covered in it." "There is a separate entrance around back," Grace continued, not entirely sure why she was telling him this. "Stairs that lead up to the second floor. You would not have to come through the shop." "That is good to know," he said. "I will check them out before I come back tomorrow. Make sure they are livable. If you need any repairs done to the shop itself, maybe you could make me a list. I am handy with tools, and I will have time on my hands until I figure out what I want to do for work around here." Grace nodded, and then he was gone, the bell above the door chiming his departure. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at the space he had occupied, wondering if she had just hallucinated the entire conversation. But the chair across from her was slightly askew where he had sat, and when she walked to the window, she could see him crossing the street, his long stride carrying him toward the land office. Her hands were shaking as she returned to her work table, but for the first time in weeks, it was not from fear or stress. She picked up her needle and tried to focus on the delicate beading she was adding to the bodice of Mary Henderson's dress. But her mind kept wandering back to Winter Lake eyes and work-roughened hands and the impossible offer that might save everything she had built. That evening, after she had locked up the shop and returned to her small room at Martha Peterson's boarding house, Grace found herself confiding in her landlady over dinner. Martha was a widow in her 50s who had run the boarding house for nearly 20 years, and in the time Grace had lived there, the older woman had become something like a friend. "So this cowboy just walked in and offered to give you the building?" Martha asked, her eyes wide with surprise. "Just like that." "Not exactly just like that," Grace said, pushing her roasted chicken around her plate. "He bought it and wants to make me the owner in exchange for letting him rent the upstairs rooms. He says it is an investment in the community." Martha set down her fork with a considering look. "And what do you think he really wants?" "I do not know," Grace admitted. "That is what worries me. But Martha, if his offer is genuine, it would solve everything. I would not have to worry about Harris raising the rent or evicting me. I could make repairs, maybe even expand the business eventually." "It does sound too good to be true," Martha said carefully. "But I will tell you what I know about Zachary Brennan, which is not much. He has been in town maybe 3 times over the past several years, always passing through with cattle drives. Stayed here once, actually, about 2 years back. Paid his rent on time, was quiet and respectful, helped me fix my back gate without being asked. He struck me as a decent sort, but that was only a few days' acquaintance. Grace felt a small measure of relief at this confirmation that Zachary was at least who he claimed to be. He said he wants to settle down, put down roots. At 25, that makes sense, Martha said thoughtfully. Most men are married with families by that age, or at least thinking seriously about it. Driving cattle is young man's work. The body cannot take it forever. He said he has a sister in St. Louis, Grace added. Wants a permanent address so she can write to him. Martha nodded slowly. Family is important. If he is trying to maintain those ties, that speaks well of his character. She paused, studying Grace's face. But I can see you are worried about more than just whether his offer is legitimate. What do you mean? Grace asked, though she suspected she knew. I mean, I saw your face when you were talking about him, Martha said gently. There was something there besides suspicion and relief. Be careful, Grace. Even if this man is as good as he seems, getting your business and your heart tangled up together could lead to complications. Grace felt her cheeks heat. I just met him today. I am not getting my heart tangled in anything. Maybe not yet, Martha said with a knowing smile. But I have seen that look before, dear. Just promise me you will be cautious. Make sure everything is legal and proper before you make any decisions. I will, Grace promised. I told him I wanted to see the paperwork, have someone look at it who understands legal matters. Good, Martha said firmly. In fact, why do not you take it to Judge Morrison? He is retired now, but still sharp as a tack. He helped me with some legal troubles after my husband passed. He will not charge you much, and he will know if anything looks suspicious. Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders at having a concrete plan. That is a wonderful idea, Martha. Thank you. Just being practical, Martha said, returning to her dinner. Now eat your chicken before it gets cold. You are too thin as it is, and you need your strength if you are going to be dealing with this situation. Grace picked up her fork obediently, but her mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow afternoon, wondering what the paperwork would say, whether Judge Morrison would find hidden clauses or conditions that would reveal Zachary's true intentions. And beneath all that practical concern ran a current of something else, something that quickened her pulse when she remembered the way he had looked at her, respectful but interested, as though he saw more than just a woman in trouble but a person worth knowing. She spent a restless night, dreams full of confusing images. Her shop with a new sign, the upstairs rooms cleaned and furnished, Zachary smiling at her across a table. She woke before dawn, tangled in her sheets, and gave up on sleep to watch the sunrise paint the mountains gold and pink through her small window. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Grace threw herself into finishing Mary Henderson's dress, channeling her nervous energy into tiny, perfect stitches. The beading caught the light beautifully, and she knew Mary would be thrilled, but she found it hard to take satisfaction in her work when her entire future hung in uncertainty. Mary arrived at 2 in the afternoon to collect the dress, her mother accompanying her. At 16, Mary was bubbling with excitement about the dance being held next Saturday at the town hall, and she nearly cried with joy when she saw the finished gown. Oh, Miss Nelson, it is even more beautiful than I imagined. Thomas will not be able to take his eyes off me. You will be the prettiest girl there, Grace assured her with genuine warmth, helping her into the dress for a final fitting. The measurements were perfect, and the soft blue fabric complemented Mary's fair coloring beautifully. Just remember to be careful with the beading. If any come loose, bring it back to me right away so I can repair it before they all start falling off. After the Hendersons left, their payment adding a small but welcome weight to Grace's cash box, she found herself pacing the shop, straightening already straight fabric bolts, rearranging her button collection, anything to keep her hands busy. When the clock on the wall showed 3:30, she gave up and simply stood by the window, watching the street for Zachary's tall figure. He appeared at precisely 4 o'clock, carrying a leather satchel and looking freshly shaved and washed, his hair still slightly damp and darkening the collar of his clean shirt. Grace's heart did an inconvenient little flip at the sight of him, and she firmly told herself it was just nervousness about the paperwork, nothing more. "Miss Nelson," he greeted her as he entered, removing his hat. "Thank you for seeing me again." "Mr. Brennan," she replied, gesturing to the sitting area. "Please sit down." He pulled several documents from his satchel, handling them carefully. "I have the deed here showing I purchased the building from Edmund Harris yesterday morning. As you can see, the clerk stamped and signed it. Everything official. And here is the ownership transfer I drafted last night." Grace took the papers with trembling fingers, forcing herself to read slowly and carefully despite the urgency thrumming through her veins. The deed seemed straightforward enough, showing that Zachary Brennan had purchased the property at 412 Main Street, Ouray, Colorado, for the sum of $800, paid in full. The clerk's signature and official stamp were clearly visible. The ownership transfer was written in neat, careful handwriting, each letter formed with precision that suggested someone who had taught himself to write and took pride in doing it well. It stated simply that Zachary Brennan, legal owner of the property located at 412 Main Street, did hereby transfer full ownership to Grace Nelson, with the sole condition that she maintain the property in good repair and allow Zachary Brennan to rent the second-floor residential space for the sum of $15 per month. $15, Grace looked up at him in disbelief. "Mr. Brennan, that is far below market rate. A room at the boarding house costs $8 a week. But those rooms include meals and laundry service," Zachary pointed out. "I will be cooking and cleaning for myself." $15 a month seems fair to me." Grace shook her head. "No, it is not fair. If you are giving me this building, the least I can do is charge you proper rent. $25 per month, and that is my final offer." To her surprise, Zachary's face broke into a full smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine amusement. "Most people negotiate down, Miss Nelson, not up." "Most people are not being handed a building," she retorted, but she found herself smiling back despite her best intentions to remain professional. "I mean it, Mr. Brennan. $25. Otherwise, this feels too much like charity, and I already told you I cannot accept that." "All right," he agreed, still smiling. "$25 it is. Should I write up a new version, please?" Grace said. "And I want to take these to Judge Morrison to review before I sign anything. I hope that does not offend you, but I need to be certain everything is legal and proper." "I would not respect you if you did not take that precaution," Zachary said seriously. "Judge Morrison is a good choice. He is known for being fair and honest. Would you like me to come with you?" Grace considered, then nodded. "Actually, yes. That way, if the judge has any questions, you can answer them directly." They found Judge Morrison at his home, a neat white house on the edge of town with a garden his wife tended lovingly. The judge was a distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and sharp dark eyes that seemed to see through any deception. He invited them into his study and spent nearly an hour reviewing the documents, asking Zachary pointed questions about his intentions and his finances. "You understand, young lady," the judge said finally, addressing Grace, "that this is an extremely generous offer, uncommonly so. However, I see nothing illegal or improper in the paperwork. The deed is legitimate and the transfer is straightforward. If you accept it, you will be the legal owner of the building, responsible for property taxes and maintenance, but free to run your business without answering to a landlord." "And the rental agreement?" Grace asked. Is $25 per month reasonable? More than reasonable, the judge said. I would say it is slightly below fair market value, but not so low as to raise suspicions. Mr. Brennan will have exclusive use of the second floor, which consists of 4 rooms and a small kitchen area, if I recall correctly. That is correct, Zachary confirmed. I checked them out yesterday. They need cleaning and some furniture, but the structure is sound. Judge Morrison studied them both with those penetrating eyes, and Grace had the uncomfortable feeling he was assessing more than just the legal documents. May I offer you both some advice, as someone who has seen a great deal in my years? Of course, sir, Grace said. Mixing business and personal matters can be complicated, the judge said carefully. I am not suggesting anything improper is happening here, but I would recommend keeping very clear records of all financial transactions. Mr. Brennan should pay his rent on the 1st of each month, and you should provide him with a receipt. Any repairs or improvements should be discussed and agreed upon in writing. This will protect both of you should any disagreements arise in the future. That is very sensible advice, Grace said, feeling her cheeks warm at the implication that there might be personal matters to complicate. I will keep careful records. As will I, Zachary added. The judge nodded, satisfied. Then I see no reason why you should not proceed. Miss Nelson, if you wish to accept this transfer, you may sign here. I will witness it and file a copy with the town clerk tomorrow. Grace picked up the pen the judge offered, her hand hovering over the paper for just a moment as the full weight of the decision settled over her. Once she signed, she would own the building, would have security and stability she had only dreamed of. But she would also be tying herself to Zachary Brennan in a way she could not quite define, creating a connection that both thrilled and terrified her. Miss Nelson, the judge prompted gently, do you wish to proceed? She took a breath and signed her name in her careful copperplate script, each letter formed perfectly as she had learned in her years at finishing school before her rebellion. Zachary signed below her, his handwriting matching the document he had drafted. The judge added his signature as witness and affixed his personal seal. Congratulations, Miss Nelson, Judge Morrison said with a warm smile. You are now a property owner. Grace stared at the document, at her name in ink that was already drying, making it real and permanent. Thank you, Judge Morrison, and thank you for reviewing everything so carefully. Just doing my civic duty, the judge said. Now, I expect you will both want to celebrate this occasion. My wife made apple pie this morning. Why do not you stay for a slice? They sat in the judge's parlor eating pie that tasted like autumn and new beginnings, while Mrs. Morrison, a cheerful woman with laugh lines around her eyes, asked Grace about her latest dress commissions and told Zachary about her nephew who also worked cattle drives in Wyoming. It was surprisingly comfortable, and Grace found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around people she did not know well. When they finally left, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple above the mountain peaks. Zachary walked with Grace back toward Main Street, matching his longer stride to her shorter one without seeming to think about it. I still cannot quite believe it, Grace said as they walked. This morning I woke up thinking I would lose everything, and now I own a building. You deserve it, Zachary said simply. I asked around quite a bit before I made my decision. Everyone spoke highly of you, your skill, your integrity, your kindness to customers even when they were difficult. Grace felt pleasure at the compliment but also curiosity. Who did you ask? The clerk at the general store said you helped his wife alter her wedding dress when they could not afford to pay much, Zachary said. The blacksmith's daughter said you gave her sewing lessons for free because you saw she had talent. Martha Peterson at the boarding house said you were the best tenant she ever had, always paying on time and treating her home with respect. Should I go on? No, Grace said, her voice slightly choked. I just did what seemed right. Exactly, Zachary said. That is why I wanted to help you. The world needs more people who do what seems right even when it is hard. They reached the dress shop, and Grace realized she was reluctant for the evening to end, which was absurd considering she would be seeing Zachary regularly now that he would be living upstairs. Would you like to see what needs to be done in the shop? She asked impulsively. You mentioned making repairs, and I could show you the problem areas. I would like that, Zachary agreed, following her inside. For the next hour, they walked through the shop while Grace pointed out issues she had learned to work around. The leak in the back corner that required her to move her fabric storage whenever it rained, the front step that wobbled dangerously, the window that no longer opened properly. Zachary made notes on a small pad he produced from his pocket, asking questions about how she used each space, what would make her work easier. The biggest problem is storage, Grace admitted, gesturing to bolts of fabric stacked somewhat haphazardly against one wall. I try to keep a good variety on hand so customers can see options, but I have no proper shelving. And I need better lighting over my work table. Sometimes in winter, I can barely see what I am sewing. I can build shelves, Zachary said, studying the wall with an assessing eye. And we can add more lamps, maybe position your table closer to the window. What about heat? That stove does not look very efficient. It is terrible, Grace admitted. Last winter I wore 3 layers while I worked and still froze, but a new stove costs money I do not have. Now you have a building, Zachary reminded her gently. Buildings have value. You could take a loan against the property to make improvements that would pay for themselves in increased business. Or I could front the money and you could pay me back over time. No interest, just what it costs. Grace shook her head firmly. No, you have already done more than enough. If I take a loan, it will be from a bank, all proper and official. She paused, then added softly, but thank you for offering. Zachary nodded, not pressing the issue. Well, the repairs I mentioned will not cost much, just materials and labor. I can do the work myself when I have time. Where do you buy your supplies? There is a lumber yard on the south edge of town, Grace said, and the general store carries most hardware items. I will go there tomorrow and get started on the front step, Zachary said. That is a safety issue and should not wait. The leak in the roof might take me a bit longer to track down and fix properly, but I will do that before the next rain if I can. They stood in the fading light filtering through the windows, and Grace was suddenly very aware of how close they were standing, how tall he was, how his eyes seemed even more striking in the shadows. She stepped back quickly, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. I should let you go, she said, her voice coming out slightly breathless. I need to get back to the boarding house for dinner, and I am sure you have things to do as well. Actually, I wanted to ask if you would have dinner with me tomorrow night, Zachary said, the words coming out in a rush as though he had been working up the courage to say them. Nothing fancy, just the restaurant on 2nd Street. I would like to celebrate your new property ownership properly. Grace knew she should say no, should keep things purely business between them, but the hopeful look in his eyes and the warmth spreading through her chest made it impossible. I would like that, she heard herself say. What time? 6 o'clock, Zachary suggested. That will give me time to work on your front step during the day. 6 o'clock, Grace agreed, and then, because she could not seem to stop herself, thank you, Zachary, for everything. You have changed my life in ways I still cannot fully comprehend. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face again, making him look younger and less careworn. I am glad I could help, Grace. I have a feeling this is going to be good for both of us. After he left, Grace stood alone in her shop in a building she owned, and let herself feel the full weight of her changed circumstances. She was a property owner at 25, single and independent, and secure in a way she had never imagined possible. But even as she celebrated that victory, part of her mind was already spinning ahead to tomorrow night's dinner, wondering what she would wear, what they would talk about, whether the flutter in her stomach meant she was making a terrible mistake. Martha noticed her distraction as soon as Grace arrived back at the boarding house. "Well," she demanded, "what did Judge Morrison say?" "He said everything was legal and proper," Grace said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I signed the papers. I own the building, Martha. I actually own it." Martha let out a delighted laugh and pulled Grace into a tight hug. "Oh, my dear, that is wonderful news. We must celebrate. I have some wine I have been saving for a special occasion." Over dinner with Martha and the two other boarders, a school teacher named Miss Sullivan, and a mining engineer called Mr. Chen, Grace shared the story of her incredible good fortune. Both offered their congratulations, though Miss Sullivan expressed some concern about Grace being tied to a man she barely knew. "I am not tied to him," Grace protested. "He is simply my tenant." "A tenant you had dinner with yesterday and are having dinner with again tomorrow," Martha pointed out with a knowing look. "I am not criticizing, dear, just observing." "It is a business dinner," Grace said, but even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. "To discuss the repairs and such." "Of course it is," Martha agreed, her eyes twinkling. "And I am sure it is pure coincidence that you have checked your reflection in every shiny surface since you got home." Grace opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again and laughed. "All right, perhaps I am a bit interested in him. But that does not mean anything will come of it. I barely know him." "But you would like to know him better," Miss Sullivan said gently. She was a practical woman in her early 30s who had never married, devoted to her students and her independence. "There is nothing wrong with that, Grace. Just be cautious. A man who seems too good to be true sometimes is." "But sometimes they are just good," Martha countered. "I knew my Harold for only 3 weeks before we married, and we had 27 happy years together before the fever took him. When something feels right, it feels right." Grace thought about that later as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her small room. Did Zachary feel right? She had to admit there was something about him that called to her. A kindness beneath the rough exterior. An understanding in his eyes that suggested he knew what it was like to struggle and survive. But she had also built her entire life on being careful, on trusting her own judgment and not letting anyone else have power over her decisions. Owning the building gave her security, but getting involved with her tenant could complicate everything. What if things went wrong between them? What if he expected more from her than she was willing to give? What if she was reading warmth and interest into perfectly ordinary kindness? But then she remembered the way he had looked at her when she insisted on paying him proper rent, the admiration and amusement in his eyes. She remembered his honesty about his past, the vulnerability he had shown in sharing his reasons for leaving home. Those were not the actions of a man playing games. Those were the actions of someone genuine trying to make a real connection. Grace rolled onto her side, hugging her pillow, and admitted to herself that she wanted that connection too. She had been alone for 5 years, pouring everything into her work, keeping everyone at a careful distance. Maybe it was time to take a different kind of risk, to open herself to the possibility that not every man would try to control her, that some might actually see her as an equal partner. The next day passed in a blur of activity. Grace spent the morning working on a new commission for Mrs. Wheeler, the wife of one of the mine owners, who wanted an entire wardrobe made before her trip to Denver next month. It was a large order that would pay well, and Grace found herself working with extra care, wanting everything to be perfect. Around mid-morning, she heard hammering from outside and went to investigate. Zachary was crouched on her front step, his shirt sleeves rolled up, replacing the loose boards with new lumber. He looked up as she appeared in the doorway, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Did I disturb you?" he asked. "I am sorry, I should have warned you I would be making noise." "It is fine," Grace assured him. "I am just glad to see it being fixed. That step has nearly tripped me more times than I can count." "Should be safe now," Zachary said, testing his work with his weight. "I will varnish it tomorrow once the wood has had time to settle. You might want to use the back entrance tonight and tomorrow, just to be safe." "Thank you," Grace said, watching him work with appreciation for his skill. His hands moved confidently, each movement economical and precise. "You are very good at this." "Had to learn to be," Zachary said, returning to his hammering. "On the trail, if something broke, you fixed it yourself or did without, made me handy with tools." Grace lingered in the doorway, knowing she should return to her work but finding herself reluctant to go back inside. "What did you do exactly on the cattle drives?" Zachary sat back on his heels, seeming pleased by her interest. "Depends on the drive. Sometimes I was just a regular cowhand, riding drag and eating dust for months. But I learned quick and worked hard, so eventually I became a trail boss. That meant planning the route, managing the other hands, making sure the cattle arrived healthy and on time." "That sounds like a lot of responsibility," Grace said. "It was," he agreed. "But I liked it. Liked knowing people counted on me, liked solving problems and figuring things out. Only downside was the constant moving. 3 months on the trail, a few weeks in whatever town we ended up in, then back south to pick up another herd and do it all again." "Do you miss it?" Grace asked curiously. "The traveling, the adventure." Zachary was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I miss the freedom of it, the simplicity. But mostly no. I am ready for something different, something that builds instead of just moving in circles." "Does that make sense?" "It does," Grace said softly. "I think that is what I have been trying to do here, build something that lasts." Their eyes met, and Grace felt that flutter in her stomach again, stronger this time. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and potential, until a wagon rattled past on the street and broke the spell. "I should get back to work," Grace said, stepping back. "But thank you again for fixing the step." "My pleasure," Zachary said. "I will see you at 6. 6, Grace confirmed and retreated into the shop before she could say something foolish. The rest of the day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Grace finished Mrs. Wheeler's first dress and started on a second, but her mind kept wandering to the evening ahead. Finally, at 5 o'clock, she gave up pretending to work and went back to the boarding house to change. She stood before her small wardrobe, feeling foolish for caring so much about what to wear. She had 3 good dresses: a dark blue that was practical and professional, a green that brought out the color in her eyes, and a rose-colored one with delicate lace at the collar that she had made for herself as a treat last Christmas, but had never worn. Martha appeared in her doorway as Grace was debating. "The rose," she said decisively. "Definitely the rose." "It is not too fancy?" Grace asked doubtfully. "It is perfect," Martha said firmly. "You made it beautifully and the color suits you. Besides, a woman should feel pretty when she is having dinner with a handsome man." "It is a business dinner," Grace protested weakly. "Of course it is," Martha said, exactly as she had the night before. "Now get dressed before you are late." The rose dress fit perfectly, as Grace had known it would, hugging her waist and falling in soft folds to the floor. She pinned her dark hair up, leaving a few curls loose around her face in a style that was fashionable but not too formal. a touch of rose oil at her wrists and throat, and she was as ready as she could be. Zachary was waiting outside the restaurant when she arrived, and the way his face lit up when he saw her made every moment of indecision worthwhile. He had dressed up as well, wearing clean dark trousers and a white shirt under a vest, his hair neatly combed and his jaw freshly shaved. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. "Thank you," Grace said, feeling her cheeks warm as she accepted his escort. "You look very nice yourself." The restaurant was one of the nicer establishments in our array, with red checked tablecloths and candles on each table. The owner, a gregarious man named Antonio who had come from Italy 20 years earlier, greeted them warmly and showed them to a quiet corner table. "So," Zachary said once they had ordered and been served glasses of wine, "how does it feel to be a property owner?" "Surreal," Grace admitted. "I keep expecting to wake up and discover it was all a dream. I walked by the building this morning and just stared at it, thinking I owned that, and could not quite make it feel real." "It is real," Zachary said with a smile, "and well-deserved. You built a successful business from nothing. That takes courage and skill." "What about you?" Grace asked. "Do you have any ideas yet about what you want to do now that you have settled here?" Zachary took a sip of his wine, considering. "I have been thinking about it. I have some skills that could be useful. I am good with horses, good with repairs and building. I thought maybe I could hire myself out for odd jobs while I figure out something more permanent, or possibly start buying and training horses to sell. There is always a market for good mounts." "That sounds promising," Grace said, "and you would be good at it. I can tell you understand animals." "I always got along better with horses than people," Zachary admitted with a slight laugh. "They are more straightforward. You treat them right, they treat you right. People are more complicated." "But you are learning to navigate the complications," Grace pointed out. "What you did for me, buying the building and transferring ownership, that required understanding people very well." "Maybe," Zachary allowed. "Or maybe I just got lucky and my instincts were right. I took a risk on you, Grace. I am glad it is working out." Their food arrived, plates of pasta with rich tomato sauce and fresh bread still warm from the oven. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Zachary told her stories from the trail, some funny, some harrowing, all told with an eye for detail that made her feel like she was there. Grace shared her own stories of learning to run a business, the difficult customers, the satisfying triumphs, the loneliness of being a woman alone in a world that did not always approve of independence. "Did you ever think about going back east?" Zachary asked as they finished their meal. "When things were hard, sometimes," Grace admitted. "Especially in the beginning when I barely had enough customers to pay my rent. But then I would remember what I would be going back to, the suffocating expectations, the marriage my parents wanted to force me into, and I knew I would rather struggle here than be comfortable there." "I understand that," Zachary said quietly. "There were times on the trail when I was so tired and sore I could barely move, when I wondered what the hell I was doing out there. But then I would remember my father's fists, the look in my sister's eyes when she thought I was going to let her be sold, and I knew I had made the right choice." Grace reached across the table impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "We are survivors, you and I. We know what it is like to choose hard freedom over easy captivity." Zachary turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers, and Grace felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the wine. "Maybe that is why this feels so easy," he said softly. "Talking to you, being with you, you understand in a way most people do not." "I feel the same," Grace admitted, her heart beating faster. "I have not talked to anyone like this in years. I forgot what it was like to let my guard down." They sat there for a moment, hands linked across the table, until Antonio appeared to ask if they wanted dessert. They ordered tiramisu to share, and the moment shifted into something lighter, though Grace noticed Zachary did not let go of her hand right away. As they walked back toward Main Street after dinner, Grace felt something shifting inside her, defenses she had maintained for years beginning to crumble. She had come west to escape being owned by a man, had built her life around independence and self-reliance. But Zachary was not trying to own her. He had given her ownership, given her security, asked for nothing but the chance to be near her. "Thank you for dinner," she said as they reached the dress shop. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I," Zachary said. He hesitated, then added, "Grace, I know this is all happening fast and I do not want to presume anything, but I would like to see you again, outside of just being your tenant. Would that be all right?" Grace looked up at him, at the hope and uncertainty in his eyes, and made a decision. "I would like that very much." The smile that spread across his face was worth any risk. "Tomorrow is Sunday. Would you like to take a walk after church? I have not explored much of the area around our yet." "I would love to," Grace said. "There is a trail that leads to some beautiful falls about a mile out of town. The wildflowers should be blooming now." "It is a date then," Zachary said softly. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture that made Grace's breath catch. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Zachary," she managed, and watched him walk around to the back entrance that led to his upstairs rooms. She practically floated back to the boarding house, where Martha took one look at her face and started laughing. "I do not need to ask how dinner went." "It was perfect," Grace said dreamily, then caught herself. "But we are taking things slowly, just getting to know each other." "Of course," Martha said, still smiling. "Is that why you are glowing like a lantern?" Grace tried to look stern but could not maintain it. "Oh, Martha, what am I doing? A week ago, I was facing eviction, and now I own a building and am courting my tenant. My life has turned completely upside down." "Sometimes upside down is exactly the right direction," Martha said wisely. "Now go to bed. You need to rest if you are going walking tomorrow. And pick some flowers while you are out. Your room could use some brightening." Sunday morning found Grace at the small church on 3rd Street, where she attended services regularly more for the community connection than religious fervor. She saw Zachary slip into a pew near the back just as the service was starting, and though she tried to focus on the sermon, she found her attention wandering to where he sat, straight-backed and attentive. After the service, they met outside, and Grace introduced Zachary to several of the women who had commissioned dresses from her. She watched their reactions carefully, pleased to see approval in most eyes, though Mrs. Hendricks, the pastor's wife, did give her a slightly questioning look that Grace chose to ignore. They collected a picnic lunch from Martha, who had insisted on packing food for them, and set off down the trail toward the falls. It was a perfect June day, warm but not hot, with a breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. The San Juan Mountains rose around them in magnificent peaks, still snow-capped despite the season. "I understand now why you chose this place," Zachary said as they walked. "It is beautiful in a way that makes you feel small but also part of something bigger." "Exactly," Grace agreed. "Boston felt so crowded, so confined. Here I can breathe." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following the trail as it wound through stands of aspen and pine. True to Grace's prediction, wildflowers bloomed everywhere, painting the meadows in shades of purple, yellow, and white. Zachary picked a handful of purple columbines and presented them to her with a slight bow that made her laugh. The falls were even more spectacular than usual, swollen with snowmelt, the water crashing down the rocks in a white torrent that sent up a cooling mist. They found a flat rock near the base where they could sit and eat their lunch, the roar of the water making conversation difficult, but not impossible. "Tell me something you have never told anyone else," Zachary said as they shared cold chicken and fresh bread. Grace thought about it, watching the water cascade down. "I am afraid I will never be good enough," she finally said. "No matter how many beautiful dresses I make, how many happy customers I serve, part of me still hears my parents' voices telling me I am a disappointment and a shame to the family." Zachary was quiet for a moment, then said, "I am afraid I will turn into my father, that someday something will happen and I will find that violence inside myself and not be able to control it." Grace turned to look at him, seeing the fear in his eyes. "You are nothing like your father. You saved your sister. You have spent 10 years working hard and saving money instead of wasting it on drink. You helped me, a complete stranger, for no reason except kindness. You think those things mean I am not capable of violence?" Zachary asked quietly. "I have been in my share of fights, Grace. I have hurt people when I had to. That capacity is in me, and it scares me sometimes." "There is a difference between defending yourself and being cruel," Grace said firmly. "Between necessary violence and enjoying it. I do not believe you would ever hurt someone who did not deserve it, and I certainly do not believe you would hurt someone weaker than yourself." "How can you be so sure?" he asked. "Because I have seen how you move around me," Grace said. "Always careful not to crowd me, always asking permission before assuming. Because you gave me ownership instead of leverage, because you treat me like an equal, not a possession. Those are not the actions of a man who uses his strength to dominate." Zachary reached out and took her hand, holding it gently. "Thank you for that. I hope you are right." "I am right," Grace said with confidence she truly felt. "And you are wrong about something else too. You are already good enough, Zachary, more than good enough." He smiled at her, that transforming smile that made her heart skip. "We are quite a pair, are we not? Two wounded people trying to convince each other they are worth something. Maybe that is exactly what we both need," Grace said softly. They sat by the falls for another hour, talking and laughing and simply enjoying each other's company. When the afternoon began to wane, they reluctantly packed up their picnic and started back toward town, walking closer together now, shoulders occasionally brushing in a way that felt both natural and electrically charged. Over the following weeks, Grace and Zachary fell into a pattern that felt like it had always existed. He worked during the days on repairs to the building, fixing the leak in the roof, building the shelves Grace needed, improving the shop in a dozen small ways. She sewed and served customers, her business actually increasing as word spread that she now owned her shop and would not be disappearing suddenly due to landlord troubles. In the evenings, they often had dinner together, sometimes at the restaurant, sometimes with Martha bringing extra portions to the shop that they shared at the small table in the back. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's habits and preferences, discovering shared values and complementary differences. Zachary began taking odd jobs around town, fixing fences and roofs, training horses for a few of the ranchers outside of our array. He was good at it, and his reputation for honest work spread quickly. Grace watched him bloom under the positive attention, saw him relax into the community in a way she recognized from her own experience of finding a place to belong. One evening in late July, as they sat in the back room of the shop after closing, Zachary took her hand across the table. "Grace, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her nervous. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "Maybe already have fallen. I know we have only known each other for 2 months, and I know you value your independence. I am not trying to rush you or pressure you. I just needed you to know how I feel." Grace felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It terrifies me because I swore I would never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. But Zachary, you are not trying to take my power. You are adding to it, making me stronger instead of weaker." "That is all I want," he said earnestly. "To be your partner, not your owner. To build something together while we each maintain our own independence." "Is that even possible?" Grace asked. "Can two people be together without one dominating the other?" "I believe it is," Zachary said. "My aunt and uncle, the ones who took in my sister, they had that kind of partnership. They made decisions together, respected each other's opinions, supported each other's dreams. It is possible, Grace. We can make it possible." She looked at him across the table, this man who had changed her life in so many ways, and felt something settle into place inside her. "I want to try. I am afraid, but I want to try." Zachary came around the table and pulled her gently to her feet, taking both her hands in his. "Then we will try together. And if you ever feel like I am taking too much, if you ever feel controlled or confined, you tell me. We figure it out together. All right?" "All right," Grace agreed, and when he bent to kiss her, she rose on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more, gentle but passionate, respectful but full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why did you wait so long?" Grace asked with a shaky laugh. "I wanted to be sure," he said. "Sure that you were ready, sure that I was not pushing you faster than you wanted to go." "You are a good man, Zachary Brennan," Grace said softly. "I am trying to be," he replied. "For you, I want to be the best man I can be." They spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, carefully, tentatively, but with growing confidence. Zachary admitted he had been thinking about starting his own business, training and selling horses. Grace confessed she had been considering expanding her shop to carry ready-made dresses in addition to custom commissions. "We could support each other," Zachary said. "I help you with the physical work of expansion, and you help me with the bookkeeping and business side of horse training. Partners." "Partners," Grace agreed, liking the sound of it. As summer turned to autumn, their relationship deepened and grew. The whole town seemed to know they were courting, and while a few of the more conservative residents expressed disapproval of Grace's unmarried status and independent ways, most people were happy for them. Martha was positively gleeful, already planning what she called the inevitable wedding. "We have not talked about marriage," Grace protested when Martha brought it up over breakfast one morning in September. "But you will," Martha said confidently. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look at him the same way. It is only a matter of time." Grace could not really argue with that because she had been thinking about marriage herself. The thought still frightened her, carried echoes of her parents' plans and her desperate flight to freedom. But with Zachary, it felt different. He never pushed, never demanded, simply made it clear through his actions and words that he wanted a future with her, and was willing to wait until she was ready. The conversation finally happened on a cool October evening as they walked back from dinner. The aspen trees had turned gold, making the mountains look like they were on fire in the sunset light. Zachary stopped at a small park near the church and turned to face her. "Grace, I know this is a difficult subject for you, but I need to ask. Would you ever consider marrying me?" Grace felt her heart start to race, but she made herself breathe slowly and think before answering. "I would consider it," she said carefully, "but I would need certain things. I would need to keep my shop, keep my own income and independence. I would need us to make decisions together, not have you make them for me. I would need to know that I am your partner, not your property." "All of that sounds exactly right to me," Zachary said. I would never ask you to give up your shop or your independence. Those things are part of who you are, and I love all of who you are. As for being partners, that is the only way I want to live, with you beside me, not behind me." "Then yes," Grace said, her voice shaking slightly. "Yes, I would consider marrying you, more than consider it. I want to marry you, Zachary." His face lit up with joy so pure it made her heart ache. "Really? You are sure?" "I am sure," she said, and realized with surprise that she was. "I love you and I trust you, and I want to build a life with you." Zachary pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while he whispered against her hair, "I love you so much. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this." They were married in November, a small ceremony at the church with Martha and Judge Morrison standing as witnesses. Grace wore a dress she had made herself, ivory silk with delicate lace she had imported from Denver, simple but elegant. Zachary wore his best suit, purchased specially for the occasion, and the pride and love in his eyes when he saw her coming down the aisle made her certain she had made the right choice. The pastor spoke about partnership and respect, equality and love, as though he understood the kind of marriage they wanted to build. When it came time for the vows, Grace spoke hers clearly and firmly, no trembling or doubt, and Zachary's voice was steady as he promised to honor and cherish her for all their days. Martha cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and threw rice at them as they left the church to cheers from the townspeople who had gathered to watch. There was a party afterward at the restaurant, Antonio having insisted on hosting a wedding celebration for two of his favorite customers. That night, after the party had ended and the well-wishers had gone home, Zachary carried Grace across the threshold of their home, the rooms above the dress shop that he had spent months making beautiful. He had built furniture with his own hands, a bed frame carved with a pattern of columbines, a wardrobe sized to hold both their clothes, a dining table where they could sit together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan," he said softly, setting her down gently. "Mrs. Brennan," Grace repeated, trying out the name. It felt strange but not bad, like a new dress that needed a bit of breaking in. "I might keep using Miss Nelson for business if that is all right with you." "Grace, you can call yourself whatever makes you happy," Zachary said. "You are my wife, and that is what matters to me. The name does not change who you are." She kissed him for that, and the kiss deepened into more, nerves and excitement mingling as they moved toward the bedroom. Grace had worried about this part, her only knowledge of marital relations coming from whispered conversations with other women and her mother's dire warnings about a wife's duty. But Zachary was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable and willing every step of the way. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, Grace felt a peace she had never known. "That was not at all what I expected," she murmured. "Good unexpected or bad unexpected?" Zachary asked, a hint of worry in his voice. "Very good unexpected," Grace assured him. "My mother made it sound like something to be endured, but that was actually wonderful. It will get even better," Zachary promised. "As we learn each other, figure out what we both enjoy. Marriage is a journey, not a destination." "I like that," Grace said sleepily. "A journey we take together." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. They had to learn to share space, to navigate each other's moods and habits, to find the balance between togetherness and independence. There were disagreements about money, about how to run their respective businesses, about whose family they would visit first. But they worked through each challenge with the same partnership they had promised at their wedding. When Grace felt overwhelmed by Zachary's tendency to want to fix every problem, she told him gently that sometimes she just needed him to listen. When Zachary felt frustrated by Grace's reluctance to accept his help, he learned to offer suggestions instead of solutions, and respect her choices even when he disagreed. The dress shop thrived under Grace's ownership, especially once she took out a small loan and added the ready-made dresses she had dreamed of. Women loved being able to walk in and purchase a dress immediately rather than waiting weeks for a custom commission, and Grace loved the steady income it provided. She hired a young woman named Clara to help with the simpler sewing, which freed Grace to focus on the more complex custom work that she enjoyed most. Zachary's horse training business grew as well, his reputation for fair dealing and quality animals spreading throughout the region. He purchased a small piece of land on the outskirts of town and built corrals and a barn, spending his days working with horses and his evenings with Grace, the two sides of his life complementing each other perfectly. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Grace realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had seen too many women die in childbirth, knew the risks that pregnancy carried. But Zachary's joy when she told him was so pure that she could not help but share it. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating as though he could not quite believe it. "Grace, we are going to be parents." "Are you ready for that?" she asked, needing reassurance. "For the responsibility, the changes it will bring, I am terrified," Zachary admitted, "but I am ready. We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Grace found the physical changes challenging. She could not sew for as long without her back aching, could not move as quickly around the shop. But Clara stepped up, taking on more responsibilities, and Zachary helped however he could, taking over the heavy lifting and even attempting to cook dinner on Grace's worst days. Martha was in her element, offering advice and knitting tiny clothes, already calling herself honorary grandmother. Judge Morrison and his wife invited them for dinner regularly, sharing stories of their own children and grandchildren, offering wisdom and support. In December, as snow began to fall in earnest and the mountains turned white, Grace went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when she truly thought she might die, might become another sad statistic of childbirth. But with Martha attending her and Zachary holding her hand, refusing to be sent away despite convention, she pushed through the pain and fear. When she finally heard the baby's cry, thin and outraged in the winter air, Grace burst into tears of relief. "A boy," Martha announced, cleaning the baby efficiently. "A healthy, strong boy." Zachary was crying too, she realized, tears streaming down his face as Martha placed the tiny bundle in Grace's arms. "He is perfect," Zachary whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger, marveling as the baby's fingers closed around it. "Grace, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Zachary's uncle who had taken in his sister all those years ago. Baby Thomas had his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the beginning, he was a vocal child who made his needs known. Parenthood was harder than either of them had imagined, the sleepless nights and constant demands testing them in ways nothing else had. But it also brought them closer together, united in their determination to give Thomas the loving, stable childhood neither of them had experienced. Grace had to step back from the shop for several months, but Clara proved more than capable of running things with Grace's guidance. Zachary adjusted his schedule to be home more, bringing Thomas out to the corrals in a sling so the baby could nap while his father worked. When Thomas was 6 months old, Zachary's sister Margaret wrote to say she wanted to visit. Her husband had business in Denver, and they could easily extend the trip to our array. Grace had been nervous about meeting Zachary's family, But Margaret turned out to be a warm, practical woman with her brother's Winter Lake eyes and a ready laugh. "Thank you," Margaret said to Grace on the second day of their visit, while they sat in the shop watching Thomas play with blocks on the floor, "for loving my brother, for giving him the home and family he has always deserved." "He gave me the same," Grace replied. "We saved each other, I think." "The best marriages are the ones where both people are better together than they were apart," Margaret said. "You two have that." The years passed, marked by the rhythms of their life in our Ray. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved both his mother's fabric scraps and his father's horses equally. When he was 3, Grace discovered she was pregnant again, and the following spring gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Zachary's mother. Sarah was quieter than Thomas had been, content to sit and watch the world with solemn eyes that missed nothing. She loved her mother's sewing, would sit for hours with her own blunt needle and scrap fabric, making what she called dresses for butterflies. The dress shop expanded again when Thomas was 5, Grace purchasing the building next door when it came up for sale and knocking through the wall to create a larger space. She now employed 3 seamstresses and carried a full range of ready-made clothing. The shop had become a destination, women coming from surrounding towns specifically to shop there. Zachary's horse business was equally successful, his animals prized throughout Colorado. He had hired 2 young men to help him, teaching them the gentle training methods he had developed. Together, they had built a reputation that brought customers from as far away as Denver and Santa Fe. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and Sarah was 4, the family sat together at their dining table, Thomas proudly showing his father a drawing he had made at school while Sarah carefully set out her collection of rocks. "I like our life," Zachary said suddenly, looking around at his family, his home, the life they had built together. "I look at what we have created, and I can hardly believe I am the same person who rode into town 8 years ago with nothing but the clothes on my back and some saved wages." "We both are different people than we were," Grace agreed, reaching across to take his hand. "We grew into these versions of ourselves together." "Tell us about when you met," Thomas demanded, as he often did. The story of how his parents had fallen in love was his favorite bedtime tale. So Grace and Zachary told the story again, taking turns with the narrative, embellishing slightly for dramatic effect. Thomas listened with rapt attention, as though he had never heard it before, and Sarah curled up in her father's lap, sucking her thumb. As Grace watched her family, her husband and children in the home they had created together above the shop she owned, she felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. She had come west to escape captivity and had found freedom. She had built a business to prove her worth and had found success. But most importantly, she had found love, the kind of equal partnership she had not believed possible. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, noticing her expression. "About how lucky we are," Grace said simply. "About how a crisis that seemed like the end of everything turned out to be the beginning of everything that really mattered. The dressmaker almost lost her shop," Zachary said with a smile, continuing the story the way he always did. "And the cowboy bought the building." "And made her the owner," Thomas finished, grinning. "And then they fell in love and got married and had us." "That is exactly right," Grace said, pulling her son into a hug. "And they lived happily ever after." "Are we at the happily ever after now?" Sarah asked, her voice slightly muffled by her thumb. "We are right in the middle of it," Zachary assured her, holding her close. "And it is even better than any story." As Grace looked around at her family, at the home they had built together through hard work and mutual respect and genuine love, she knew he was absolutely right. They were living there happily ever after, every single day. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. When Thomas turned 10, he declared he wanted to learn both his mother's sewing and his father's horse training, seeing no reason why he should have to choose between them. Grace taught him to cut patterns and sew straight seams, while Zachary showed him how to read a horse's body language and earn its trust. The boy thrived under their combined attention, growing into a young man who was equally comfortable with a needle or a bridle. Sarah, meanwhile, surprised them both by showing an aptitude for numbers and business. At 8 years old, she was already helping Grace track inventory and manage the shop's books, her neat columns of figures reflecting a mathematical mind neither parent quite understood where it had come from. "Maybe from my aunt," Zachary suggested, remembering how his aunt had run the household accounts for his uncle's business. When Thomas was 13 and Sarah was 10, Grace and Zachary celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Martha, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, organized a party at the restaurant where they had shared their first dinner. It seemed like the whole town turned out, testament to how beloved the couple had become in our Ray. 15 years, Grace marveled to Zachary as they danced together while Antonio's son played fiddle. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever." "The good kind of forever," Zachary said, holding her close. "The kind I want to last." "Me too," Grace agreed, resting her head against his shoulder. "Every single day I wake up grateful for the life we have built. Even when Thomas tracks mud through the shop or Sarah reorganizes my office without asking," Zachary teased. "Even then," Grace laughed. "Those are the moments that make it real, that prove we are actually living this life and not just dreaming it." As they turned slowly to the music, Grace caught sight of their reflections in the restaurant's large mirror. She saw a woman in her early 40s, still slender but with the softer lines that came from bearing children and living well. Her dark hair was now threaded with silver, her face marked with the fine lines of age and laughter. Beside her was a man whose shoulders had broadened with years of physical work, whose hair had more gray than black now, whose face bore the weathering of time spent outdoors. They looked like what they were, people who had worked hard, loved deeply, and built something lasting. There was a solidity to them, a rootedness that the young woman who had feared eviction and the young man who had drifted from cattle drive to cattle drive had lacked. They had made themselves permanent fixtures in this place, had woven themselves into the fabric of our Ray as surely as Grace wove fabric into dresses. The party continued late into the night, full of laughter and dancing and toasts to their continued happiness. When they finally walked home, Thomas carrying a sleeping Sarah on his back, Grace felt full to bursting with contentment. "Thank you," she said to Zachary as they stood outside the dress shop, looking up at the windows of their home above. "For everything. For seeing me when I needed to be seen, for giving when you could have taken, for loving me in a way that makes me more myself rather than less." "Thank you for taking a chance on me," Zachary replied. "For trusting me when you had good reason not to trust, for building this life with me. You gave me everything I did not know I was looking for." They stood together in the moonlight, children drowsing against them, the mountains rising dark against the star-filled sky, and Grace thought about how perfect imperfect moments could be. Not every day was easy, not every decision clear, but they had learned to navigate the challenges together, to support each other through difficulties, and celebrate each other's triumphs. As the children grew older and began preparing for their own futures, Grace and Zachary found themselves with more time together. Time to remember what it had been like when they were just two people falling in love. They took long rides into the mountains, picnicking by the same falls where Zachary had once picked her flowers. They had quiet dinners alone, talking about their days, making plans for the years ahead. They made love with the comfortable passion of long familiarity, mixed with the ability to still surprise each other. Thomas eventually did choose to focus more on horse training, though he never gave up sewing entirely. He went to work full-time with his father when he turned 16, showing a natural gift for the work. Sarah, meanwhile, had outgrown the shop's accounting needs and was talking about maybe going to Denver to study business formally, a prospect that both excited and terrified Grace. "She will come back," Zachary assured Grace when she voiced her fears. "This is her home. She just needs to spread her wings a bit, see what else is out there." "Like we both did," Grace admitted. "I suppose I cannot very well object when I did the same thing at her age." "Exactly," Zachary said. "And look how well that turned out for you." When Sarah did leave for Denver at 18, Grace felt the loss like a physical ache. But she threw herself into the shop, using the time to mentor Clara's daughter, who showed promise as a designer. And she and Zachary rediscovered the pleasures of being just a couple again, able to be spontaneous in ways they had not been since before children. They took a trip to St. Louis to visit Margaret and her family, Grace finally meeting the sister who had been so important in Zachary's life. Margaret's children were grown now too, and she and Zachary spent hours catching up, filling in the gaps of the years they had been apart. Grace watched them together and felt grateful that Zachary had maintained that connection, that he had people who remembered who he had been and appreciated who he had become. Sarah returned from Denver after 3 years with a degree in business, and a young man named Peter, whom she was clearly serious about. Peter was a quiet, steady man who worked as an accountant, and Grace approved of the way he looked at Sarah, with respect and admiration rather than the desire to possess that she had seen in too many young men's eyes. When Sarah and Peter married, it was a bigger wedding than Grace and Zachary's had been, reflecting Sarah's love of organization and Peter's large extended family. But it had the same feeling of joy and rightness, two people choosing each other freely and building a partnership based on equality. Thomas met his own wife a year later, a rancher's daughter named Emily who could ride as well as he could and who loved horses with the same passion. Their courtship was quick but sure, both of them knowing what they wanted. Emily fit into the family as though she had always been there, her practical nature and warm humor complementing Thomas's more serious temperament. As grandchildren began to arrive, Grace felt her life entering a new phase. She and Zachary were now the older generation, the ones who gathered the family together and told stories of the old days. Grace reduced her hours at the shop, turning more of the day-to-day management over to Clara's daughter while she focused on special commissions and mentoring new seamstresses. Zachary, now in his 50s, had also scaled back his work, leaving most of the training to Thomas while he consulted on difficult cases and enjoyed the fruits of the successful business they had built. He spent more time with Grace, the two of them taking slow walks around town, greeting neighbors, watching the world change around them while their bond remained constant. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Zachary took Grace's hand. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Boston?" "Sometimes," Grace admitted, "but I cannot really imagine it. That path closed the moment I got on the train west, and I do not regret it for a second." "Even the hard parts?" Zachary asked. "The struggles, the fear, the uncertainty, even those," Grace said firmly, "because they led me here to you, to this life we built together. Every moment of fear was worth it for this." "I feel the same," Zachary said quietly. "Sometimes I think about that morning I walked into your shop, how close I came to not doing it. I almost let my own fear stop me, almost convinced myself it was not my place to interfere. But something pushed me forward. Fate, Grace suggested with a smile, or maybe just the knowledge that sometimes people need help and it is worth the risk to offer it. Whatever it was, I am grateful, Zachary said. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace. These years with you have been better than anything I could have imagined for myself. For me too, Grace said, leaning her head on his shoulder. You gave me more than just a building all those years ago. You gave me security and partnership and love. You gave me everything I did not know I needed. They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded and stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. From inside, they could hear the sounds of family, Thomas and Emily and their children visiting for dinner, Sarah's voice raised in laughter at something Peter said. The shop below had closed for the evening, and the street was quiet except for the occasional passerby calling out a greeting. Grace thought about the young woman she had been at 25, desperate and afraid, facing the loss of everything she had worked for. She thought about the young man who had walked through her door with an impossible offer, looking for a way to put down roots. They had both been searching for something they could not quite name, something more than just physical security or financial success. They had been searching for this, she realized. For the deep contentment that came from building a life with someone who truly saw you, who respected your strength and supported your weakness, who loved you not in spite of your independence but because of it. They had found in each other what they had both needed most, a partner for the journey, someone to share both burdens and joys. I love you, Grace said softly into the gathering darkness. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. And I love you, Zachary replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Always and forever. As they sat together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built and the family they had created, Grace felt a profound sense of peace. The story that had begun with crisis and uncertainty had unfolded into something beautiful and lasting. The dressmaker had kept her shop, had built it into something even greater than she had imagined. The cowboy had found his roots, had created the home and family he had always longed for. But more than that, they had found each other, had built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love, had proven that it was possible for two independent people to come together without either one losing themselves. They had created something rare and precious, a true marriage of equals, a love story for the ages. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the mountains stood eternal around them, Grace knew that their story, their happily ever after, would continue until the end of their days. They had built something that would last, not just in the buildings and businesses that bore their names, but in the love they shared and the example they had set for their children and grandchildren. The dressmaker and the cowboy had found their forever, right here in Ouray, Colorado, in the heart of the Wild West they both called home. And it was more than enough. It was everything.